The champagne flute felt heavier than it should have as Monica raised it above the crowd of well-dressed guests scattered across her pristine Scottsdale patio. Her voice carried that practiced tone she'd perfected over years of hosting open houses and charity fundraisers, warm but with an edge that cut deeper than she probably intended. I want to thank everyone for celebrating this milestone with us tonight. It's amazing how life works out, isn't it? Some of us actually made it. Her eyes found mine across the crowd, a split second of contact that felt like a needle finding its mark. The laughter that followed was polite, social, the kind that fills expensive spaces where everyone understands the subtext, but pretends they don't. I stood there in my department store dress among women wearing designer labels, holding a bottle of wine I'd picked up at the grocery store, feeling exactly like the charity case Monica had just painted me as. 8 years of this. 8 years of being the sister who couldn't quite measure up, who worked too hard for too little, who drove a 10-year-old Honda to family gatherings where everyone else pulled up in leased luxury cars. But what Monica didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd stopped caring about measuring up to their standards months ago. I'd found a different kind of measuring stick entirely. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had started like they all did, with me questioning why I'd bothered to come. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks late, forwarded through Mom with an apologetic note about how busy Monica had been with the move. No personal message. No phone call, just a generic card with my name scrawled in afterthought handwriting. I'd almost thrown it away, but something made me keep it, tuck it into the visor of my car, where it sat like a small reminder of my place in this family. Monica's new house was everything she'd dreamed of since we were kids sharing a bedroom in Dad's cramped ranch house near the construction yard. Soaring ceilings, marble countertops, a pool that reflected the desert sunset like liquid gold. The kind of place that showed up in magazines and made people stop scrolling on social media. She'd earned it, I had to admit. Her real estate career had taken off in the post-pandemic boom, and she'd parlayed her success into development deals that had everyone calling her a local success story. I'd driven down from Denver that morning, 5 hours through mountain passes and desert highways, listening to podcasts and trying to prepare myself for the inevitable comparisons. My job as a project manager for a tech startup paid well enough, but it didn't come with the glamour or the stories that made for good dinner. Party conversation. While Monica closed million-dollar deals and got her picture in the business section of the Arizona Republic, I managed software rollouts and dealt with clients who couldn't decide whether they wanted their apps to be blue or green. The guest list read like a who's who of Phoenix's up-and-coming crowd. Monica's husband David worked in commercial development, and together they'd built a network of contacts that seemed to expand every time I saw them. There were city councilmen and bank presidents, other real estate agents with perfect smiles, and expensive watches, wives who turned fitness blogging into small empires. Everyone had a story about their latest success, their newest acquisition, their child's acceptance to private school. I recognized some faces from previous gatherings, people who'd nod politely when Monica introduced me as her sister, then forget my name by the time we sat down for dinner. There was something exhausting about being the footnote in someone else's success story, the sister who worked hard but never quite hard enough, who was invited but never truly included. Mom had arrived early to help with the setup, her way of making sure Monica knew she was proud that she supported this new chapter. She moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who'd learned to navigate these social waters, complimenting the right people on the right things, asking about children and vacation homes with genuine interest. Dad would have been proud of this house, she'd told me when I arrived, her voice carrying that wistful tone that always accompanied mentions of him. Robert Thompson had died 3 years ago, sudden heart attack at the construction site where he'd spent 40 years, building other people's dreams. The funeral had been packed with contractors and suppliers, men in work boots and Sunday suits who'd known Dad as someone who kept his word and paid his bills on time. Monica had spoken beautifully about his legacy, about how he'd taught her to build something lasting, to create value where none existed before. I'd sat in the second row, listening to her turn his life into a narrative that somehow centered on her own success. The irony wasn't lost on me that Monica had made her fortune building houses, while Dad had spent his life constructing the foundation that made her success possible. Thompson & Sons construction had been his life's work, started with a single truck and a willingness to work 16-hour days. He'd always talked about passing it on, about how the business would take care of his family long after he was gone. But when the lawyers read the will, Monica had inherited the client list and the reputation, while I'd gotten a small cash settlement and a box of his old tools. She'd sold the business 6 months later, used the money to get her real estate license and start her own firm. "It's what Dad would have wanted," she'd told me over coffee, her voice carrying that reasonable tone that made disagreement seem petty. He always said the construction business was too hard on families. This way, his legacy lives on in a different form. I'd nodded and smiled, the way I always did when Monica explained her decisions. It was easier than arguing, easier than pointing out that Dad had never said anything about the construction business being too hard on families. He'd loved that work, loved the satisfaction of seeing something solid and permanent rise from empty ground. But Monica had a gift for rewriting history in ways that made her choices seem inevitable, necessary, noble. The lake house in Flagstaff had been part of the business assets, a piece of property Dad had bought years ago with plans to develop it into a small subdivision. But he'd fallen in love with the location, the way the morning light hit the water, the silence that settled over everything at dusk. Instead of developing it, he'd built a single house, a timber frame structure that looked like it had grown naturally from the forest around it. It became our family retreat, the place we'd spend long weekends and summer vacations, where Dad would teach us to fish and Mom would read novels on the deck while we played in the shallow water near the shore. After Dad died, Monica had suggested selling the lake house along with the rest of the business assets. "It's just sitting there," she'd argued. "None of us use it anymore, and the maintenance costs are getting ridiculous." But something had made me fight for it. Maybe the memory of Dad's face when he'd first shown us the property, or the way he'd talked about it being a place the family could always come back to. In the end, we'd reached a compromise. Monica would handle the sale of the business, and I'd take over the lake house, assuming the mortgage and the upkeep. It had seemed like a reasonable arrangement at the time, but looking back, I realized it was the beginning of my exile from the family narrative. The lake house became my burden, my responsibility, while Monica's real estate career became everyone's success story. Family gatherings moved to restaurants and hotels, places where the focus could be on Monica's achievements rather than the legacy Dad had left behind. The morning after Dad's funeral, I'd driven up to Flagstaff alone, needing to see the place one more time before everything changed. I'd found his old hard hat sitting on the kitchen counter, the white plastic scratched and faded from years of use, his name still visible in black marker on the front. I'd picked it up, surprised by how light it felt, how something so ordinary could carry so much weight. That was when I'd found the folder tucked away in the desk drawer, the one marked Lake House Legal. Inside were the original property documents, the business partnership agreements, and something I'd never seen before, a clause that tied the lake house specifically to the Thompson & Sons construction legacy. Dad had been more careful with his planning than any of us had realized, more protective of the things that mattered to him. The clause was simple but comprehensive. The lake house could only be sold if both surviving partners agreed, and any sale proceeds had to be reinvested in properties that maintained the Thompson construction legacy. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But there was more. If the business was ever sold or dissolved, the lake house would revert to the family member who maintained the construction business traditions. It was Dad's way of making sure the lake house stayed connected to the work that had defined his life. I'd sat at his old desk, reading the documents by lamplight, feeling something shift inside me. Monica had dissolved the business and sold the assets, but she'd never mentioned this clause, never asked if I wanted to maintain the construction legacy. She'd simply assumed I'd be content with my small inheritance and my responsibility for the lake house maintenance. That night, I'd called Angela, my college roommate who'd become a paralegal after graduation. "I need you to look at something," I'd told her, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "And I need you to keep it quiet until I figure out what it means." Angela had driven up from Phoenix that weekend, bringing her laptop and her expertise in property law. We'd spent hours going through the documents, tracing the legal connections between the business sale and the lake house ownership. What we found was both simpler and more complex than I'd expected. "Jessica," Angela had said finally, looking up from her laptop with an expression I couldn't quite read. "According to these documents, Monica never had the legal right to sell the business without your consent. The lake house clause creates a partnership structure that requires both parties to agree to any major changes." I'd stared at her, feeling the weight of what she was saying. "What does that mean?" "It means the business sale might not be legally valid, and it definitely means you have a claim to the lake house that goes beyond just taking over the mortgage. According to your father's original partnership agreement, you're entitled to a percentage of the business sale proceeds, and you have the right to challenge any decisions made without your consent." But I hadn't challenged anything. I'd watched Monica build her real estate empire with money that should have been partially mine. Watched her buy the Scottsdale house and the luxury cars and the designer clothes that made her the success story everyone celebrated. I'd kept quiet, kept paying the mortgage on the lake house, kept showing up to family gatherings where I was the sister who'd never quite figured out how to make it. Until tonight. Until Monica's toast about some of us actually making it, delivered with that smile that said she knew exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. That's when I'd decided it was time to stop being quiet, time to stop letting other people write the story of my life. The crowd had moved inside as the desert evening cooled, gathering around Monica's granite island where she'd laid out a spread that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I'd found myself in the kitchen, helping to refill water glasses and clear empty plates, falling into the familiar role of the helpful sister who made sure everything ran smoothly behind the scenes. "Jess, you don't have to do that," Monica had said, appearing beside me with a fresh bottle of wine. "You're a guest tonight." "I don't mind," I'd replied, the same response I'd been giving for years. "You know I like to help." She'd smiled, that practiced smile that looked genuine from a distance but felt hollow up close. "That's what I love about you. Always so willing to pitch in, even when you're probably exhausted from the drive down." There it was again, the subtle reminder that I was the one who had to make an effort, who had to drive 5 hours to be part of celebrations that happened in Monica's world. The assumption that my presence was a favor to her rather than a right, I'd earned through 34 years of being her sister. "Actually," I'd said, setting down the water pitcher and reaching into my purse, "I brought something I thought you might want to see." Monica had paused in her wine pouring, looking at me with curiosity. "Oh? What is it?" I'd pulled out the folder, the same one I'd found in Dad's desk 3 years ago, the one that had been sitting in my car for the past 8 hours like a loaded gun. Some documents I found when I was organizing Dad's papers. I thought you might find them interesting. Her expression had shifted slightly, the hostess' smile flickering as she recognized the legal folder. "What kind of documents?" "The original partnership agreement for Thompson & Sons," I'd said quietly, opening the folder to reveal the pages I'd read dozens of times over the past few months. "The one that includes the lake house provision." Monica had gone very still, her hand frozen above the wine bottle. Around us, the party continued, voices and laughter creating a backdrop of normalcy while everything changed. Jessica, this isn't really the time or place for... For what? I'd asked, my voice still quiet but carrying a new edge. For discussing the fact that you never had the legal right to sell Dad's business without my consent? Or for talking about the money I should have received from that sale? The color had drained from Monica's face, but she'd recovered quickly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. We can discuss this later. This is my housewarming, not a business meeting. You're right, I'd agreed, closing the folder and tucking it back into my purse. This is your housewarming, your celebration of making it, and I think everyone here should know exactly how you managed to make it so far. That's when I'd seen it, the first crack in Monica's perfect composure. The realization that her little sister, the one who drove the old Honda and wore department store dresses, might not be quite as powerless as she'd assumed. The understanding that some secrets have a way of surfacing at the most inconvenient times. What do you want, Jessica? She'd asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I want what Dad intended, I'd replied. I want the recognition that his legacy didn't die with him, that it didn't get dissolved into your real estate empire. I want acknowledgement that I've been carrying the weight of his memory while you've been rewriting the story to star yourself. Monica had looked around again, making sure we were still alone in the kitchen. How much? The question had hit me like a slap, reducing everything to a transaction, assuming that my father's memory and my own dignity could be bought with the right price. It's not about money, Monica. It's about truth. Everything's about money, Jess. That's how the world works. Maybe that's how your world works, I'd said, feeling something crystallize inside me, something that had been building for years. But it's not how Dad's world worked, and it's not how mine works either. That's when I'd made the decision. That would change everything. I'd pulled out my phone, opened the camera app, and started recording. Monica Thompson Martinez, I'd said clearly. On the evening of your housewarming party, in front of witnesses, I'm serving you with notice that I'm challenging the sale of Thompson & Sons Construction based on violations of the original partnership, agreement signed by our father, Robert Thompson. The party had gone quiet around us, conversations stopping as people turned to see what was happening in the kitchen. Monica's face had cycled through shock, anger, and calculation before settling. On the practiced smile that had gotten her through so many difficult negotiations. Jessica, you're being dramatic, she'd said, her voice carrying that reasonable tone that made my concerns seem petty and unwarranted. We're family. We can work this out privately. We are family, I'd agreed, still recording. Which is why I've waited 3 years for you to acknowledge what you took from me. What you took from Dad's legacy. David had appeared at Monica's side, his expression concerned as he took in the scene. What's going on here? Nothing that can't be resolved, Monica had said quickly, but I could see the panic in her eyes, the realization that her perfect evening was unraveling in front of her most important contacts. Actually, I'd said, turning off the recording and putting my phone away, everything's about to be resolved, because tomorrow morning, I'm filing a lawsuit to recover the money. That should have been mine from the business sale, and I'm taking back full ownership of the lake house. The silence that followed was deafening, filled with the weight of years of unspoken resentments and carefully maintained facades. Monica's guests had started to drift toward the exits, sensing drama they didn't want to be associated with, leaving behind half-empty glasses and uncomfortable smiles. You can't do this, Monica had whispered, her composure finally cracking. You'll ruin everything I've built. I'm not ruining anything, I'd replied, feeling a strange calm settle over me. I'm just claiming what was always mine, what Dad intended for me to have. That's when I'd reached into my purse one more time, pulling out the document I'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. This is a copy of the deed transfer for the lake house, filed yesterday with Coconino County. As of now, I'm the sole owner of the property and I'm exercising my right under the original partnership agreement to reclaim the construction business assets that were sold without my consent. Monica had stared at the document, her hands shaking slightly as she realized what she was looking at. "This is impossible. The lawyers said what you paid them to say," I'd interrupted. "But they didn't have access to Dad's original documents, the ones he kept in his private safe, the ones that spell out exactly what he intended to happen if the business was ever sold or dissolved." I'd looked around at the beautiful house, the expensive furnishings, the life that Monica had built with money that should have been partially mine. "You were right about one thing, Monica. Some of us actually made it, but you might have made it with resources that belonged to someone else." The evening had ended with Monica's guests filing out into the desert night, leaving behind a house that felt too big and too empty for the family that remained. I'd driven back to Denver the next morning, Dad's hard hat sitting on the passenger seat like a silent witness to everything that had changed. The lawsuit would take months to resolve. Angela had warned me. Family disputes were messy, complicated by emotions and history, and the difficulty of proving intent years after the fact. But I had the documents, the evidence that Dad had been more careful with his planning than anyone had realized. And I had something else too, the knowledge that I'd finally stopped letting other people write the story of my life. 3 weeks later, I'd received a call from Monica's lawyer, asking if I'd be willing to settle out of court. The offer was generous, more than I'd expected, but it came with conditions that would have required me to stay quiet about the original partnership agreement, to let Monica maintain the narrative that she'd built her success entirely on her own. I'd turned it down. Because sometimes the truth is worth more than money, and sometimes the only way to honor someone's memory is to make sure their intentions are carried out, no matter how inconvenient it might be for the people who'd rather forget. The lake house sits quiet now, waiting for the legal proceedings to run their course. I drive up from Denver most weekends, working on repairs and maintenance, slowly restoring it to the condition Dad would have wanted. The work is hard, physical in a way that my office job never is, but it connects me to something larger than myself, something that feels like legacy in the truest sense. Monica and I don't talk much anymore. The family gatherings have stopped, replaced by awkward text messages and updates filtered through Mom's careful diplomacy. But I sleep better at night, knowing that I finally found the courage to stand up for the truth, to claim the inheritance that was always mine, but had been buried under years of assumption and convenient forgetfulness. Sometimes I sit on the deck in the evening, watching the light fade over the water, and I can almost hear Dad's voice carried on the wind. "Build something that lasts," he used to say. "Something that matters." I think he'd be proud of what I'm building now, not just with wood and nails, but with truth and the courage to speak it when it matters most. The phone call came at 6 a.m, jarring me awake in my Denver apartment. Monica's voice sounded strained, different from the polished confidence she'd worn at the housewarming party 3 days earlier. "We need to talk," she said without preamble. "This whole thing has gotten out of hand." I'd been expecting this call, had been sitting by my phone since returning from Scottsdale, waiting for Monica to realize that her little sister wasn't going to quietly disappear this time. The legal documents Angela had helped me file were already working their way through the system, creating ripples that would soon become waves. "I'm listening," I said, settling into my kitchen chair with a cup of coffee that had gone cold while I'd stared out at the mountains, thinking about everything that had changed. "Mom's upset," Monica continued, and I could hear the calculation in her voice, the way she was already positioning herself as the reasonable one, the family peacekeeper. "She doesn't understand why you're doing this now, why you couldn't have come to me privately before involving lawyers." The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, I'd been coming to Monica privately, trying to understand why I felt so disconnected from the family, why every gathering felt like a performance where I was the only one who hadn't received the script. Every conversation had been deflected, dismissed, or redirected toward more comfortable topics like my job or my dating life, or whether I was eating enough vegetables. I tried talking to you privately, I reminded her. Remember Christmas, too. Years ago, when I asked about Dad's business papers, you told me you'd handled everything and I shouldn't worry about it. Remember last Thanksgiving when I mentioned feeling left out of family decisions? You said I was being too sensitive. Monica was quiet for a moment, and I could almost see her regrouping, searching for the angle that would make me back down. This isn't about feelings, Jessica. This is about family. We don't air our dirty laundry in public, and we don't solve problems with lawsuits. Then maybe we should have solved them with honesty, I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Maybe if you'd told me the truth about Dad's partnership agreement 3 years ago, we wouldn't be here now. The truth? Monica's voice sharpened. The truth is that Dad's business was failing. The truth is that I saved what I could and turned it into something successful. The truth is that you were living in Denver, building your own career, while I was here dealing with the mess he left behind. This was the Monica I recognized, the one who could rewrite history in real time, who could take a narrative and twist it until she emerged as the hero saving everyone from their own poor decisions. But I'd spent too many nights reading through Dad's actual business records, the ones she'd left behind in his desk, to be fooled by her version of events. Thompson & Sons wasn't failing, I said quietly. Dad had 3 major contracts lined up when he died, and the books show steady profits for the previous 5 years. You sold a healthy business and used the proceeds to launch your real estate career. You don't understand the construction industry, Monica shot back. Those contracts were dependent on Dad's personal relationships. Without him, the business would have collapsed within 6 months. Maybe, I conceded, but that should have been a decision we made together. According to the partnership agreement, I had a say in what happened to the business. You never even told me about the offers you received. Monica sighed, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted to the tone she used with difficult clients, patient but condescending. Jessica, you were grieving. We all were. I was trying to protect you from having to make impossible decisions while you were still processing Dad's death. For 3 years? I asked. You've been protecting me from the truth for 3 years? I've been protecting this family, Monica replied, and now I could hear the anger underneath her controlled exterior. Do you have any idea what this lawsuit could do to my reputation? To my business? I've spent years building relationships in this community, and you're threatening to destroy that over money. This isn't about money, I said, though I knew she wouldn't believe me. Monica lived in a world where everything was about money, where relationships were investments and family was just another network to be managed. Then what is it about? She demanded. What do you really want, Jessica? I thought about Dad's hard hat, still sitting on my kitchen counter where I'd placed it after returning from the lake house last weekend. I thought about the photo albums I'd found in his desk, full of pictures from construction sites and family gatherings, carefully preserved memories of a life that had meant something to him. I want Dad's legacy to mean something, I said finally. I want his intentions to be honored instead of buried under your success story. I want to stop pretending that his death was just an opportunity for you to rebrand yourself. That's not fair, Monica said, but her voice lacked conviction. Fair? I laughed, surprising myself with the bitterness in the sound. Was it fair? That you sold his business without consulting me? Was it fair that you've spent 3 years treating me like a charity case at family gatherings? Was it fair that you built your dream house with money that should have been partially mine? Monica was quiet for a long moment, and I wondered if she was finally grasping the magnitude of what she'd done, the layers of betrayal that had accumulated over the years like sediment in still water. What do you want me to do? She asked, finally, and I could hear something new in her voice. Something that might have been fear. I want you to acknowledge what you took, I said, I want you to honor the partnership agreement Dad set up. And I want you to stop treating me like I'm lucky to be included in a family I was born into." "And if I don't?" Monica asked. "Then we'll let the lawyers sort it out," I replied. "And whatever they decide, that's what happens." Monica hung up without saying goodbye, leaving me sitting in my kitchen with the taste of burnt coffee and the sound of my own heartbeat. I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross, stepped into territory that felt both terrifying and liberating. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal consultations and document reviews. Angela had referred me to a firm that specialized in family, business disputes, lawyers who understood the complexities of inheritance law and partnership agreements. They were cautiously optimistic about my case, though they warned me that family lawsuits were unpredictable, influenced by emotions and relationships that couldn't be quantified in legal briefs. Monica had hired her own attorneys, a white shoe firm from Phoenix that represented developers and real estate moguls. They sent a letter demanding that I cease all legal proceedings and return any business documents that belonged to the Thompson estate. The letter was professionally written and legally sound, but it felt like Monica's voice translated into legalese, the same dismissive tone wrapped in formal language. I'd also started hearing from other family members, phone calls and text messages that felt carefully orchestrated, designed to make me feel guilty for disrupting the family peace. Uncle Frank called to tell me how disappointed Dad would be to see his daughters fighting over money. Aunt Susan sent a long email about the importance of family unity and the danger of letting lawyers destroy relationships that had taken decades to build. But it was Mom's visit that shook me the most. She'd driven up from Phoenix unannounced, appearing at my apartment door on a Thursday evening with a casserole dish and the kind of worried expression that had always made me want to fix whatever was wrong. "We need to talk, sweetheart," she said, settling into my living room with the careful movements of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation. "This situation with Monica is tearing the family apart." I'd made tea and listened while Mom explained how difficult things had been since Dad died, how hard Monica had worked to keep the family together, how much the business sale had meant to all of them. She painted a picture of Monica as the dutiful daughter who'd sacrificed her own dreams to salvage what she could from Dad's legacy. "Monica never wanted to sell the business," Mom said, stirring honey into her tea with mechanical precision. "She felt responsible for taking care of everyone, for making sure Dad's work meant something. The real estate career just happened naturally from there." "Did she tell you about the partnership agreement?" I asked. "About the fact that she legally needed my consent to sell?" Mom's spoon clinked against the ceramic mug, the only sound, in my apartment for several long seconds. "Business partnerships are complicated, Jessica. There are always technicalities and legal requirements that don't reflect the real relationships between people." "This isn't a technicality, Mom. This is Dad's clear intention that major decisions about his business should involve both of his daughters." Monica ignored that, and she's been spending money that should have been partially mine for 3 years. "Money," Mom sighed, and I could see the disappointment in her eyes. "I raised you better than to fight with your sister over money." "This isn't about money," I said, though I was tired of having to explain that. Tired of having my motives reduced to greed by people who didn't want to examine their own actions. "Then what is it about?" Mom asked, echoing Monica's question from our phone call. I thought about all the family gatherings where I'd felt like an outsider, all the conversations I'd been excluded from, all the decisions that had been made without consulting me. I thought about the way Monica had slowly erased Dad's memory, replacing his construction legacy with her real estate success story. "It's about being treated like I matter," I said finally. "It's about having my voice heard in family decisions. It's about honoring Dad's intentions instead of pretending they don't exist." Mom set down her teacup and looked at me with the kind of maternal assessment that had always made me feel simultaneously loved and judged. "Monica loves you, sweetheart. We all do. but love doesn't mean we always get what we want. I'm not asking for what I want, I replied. I'm asking for what Dad intended me to have. There's a difference. Your father intended for his family to stay together, Mom said firmly. He intended for his daughters to support each other, not tear each other down with lawsuits and accusations. Then maybe Monica should have thought about that before. She decided to cut me out of the business decisions, I said, feeling my patience starting to fray. Maybe she should have considered family unity before she built her empire on money that wasn't entirely hers. Mom left that evening without resolving anything, but I could see the worry in her eyes, the fear that her family was fracturing in ways that couldn't be repaired. Part of me wanted to call Monica and apologize, to find some way to return to the uncomfortable status quo that had defined our relationship for years. But then I'd look at Dad's hard hat, sitting on my counter like a reminder of the man who'd worked 16-hour days to build something lasting, and I'd remember why I was fighting. This wasn't just about money or legal technicalities. This was about making sure his intentions mattered, that his carefully planned legacy wasn't sacrificed to his older daughter's ambition. The discovery process for the lawsuit revealed details about the business sale that I'd never known. Monica had received 3 separate offers for Thompson & Sons, ranging from $1, $2 million to $1, $8 million. She'd accepted the highest offer, from a Phoenix development company that wanted Dad's client list and reputation more than his equipment or contracts. The transaction had been completed through a complex structure that minimized taxes and maximized Monica's control over the proceeds. She'd been smart about it, I had to admit, working with accountants and lawyers to ensure she kept as much of the money as possible. But she'd also been careful to structure the sale in a way that avoided triggering the partnership provisions that would have required my involvement. My lawyers were particularly interested in emails they'd found during discovery, communications between Monica and the buyers discussing the need to streamline the ownership structure before the sale could be completed. There were references to family complications and the advantage of having a single decision-maker handle the transaction. She knew, Angela told me over lunch one afternoon, spreading the email printouts across the table like evidence in a criminal case. She knew about the partnership agreement, and she deliberately structured the sale to avoid involving you. I stared at the emails, seeing my sister's careful planning laid out in black and white. The systematic exclusion I'd felt for years hadn't been accidental or thoughtless. It had been calculated, designed to maximize Monica's control while minimizing my influence. "What does this mean for the case?" I asked. "It means we can prove intentional violation of the partnership agreement," Angela replied. "It strengthens your claim to a percentage of the sale proceeds, and it supports your argument that the lake house ownership should revert to you under the original terms." But even as the legal case grew stronger, the personal cost continued to escalate. Monica had stopped speaking to me entirely, communicating only through lawyers and carefully worded statements about protecting her family from frivolous litigation. She'd also begun what could only be described as a public relations campaign, sharing carefully curated social media posts about family betrayal and the pain of being attacked by someone you'd tried to help. The posts were subtle, never mentioning me by name, but anyone who knew our family would understand the subtext. Photos of her and David with their children, captions about the importance of loyalty and the disappointment of discovering someone's true character. Pictures of her visiting Dad's grave, accompanied by quotes about honoring his memory and staying true to his values. It was masterfully done, turning her into the victim and me into the ungrateful sister who'd bitten the hand that fed her. Her friends and colleagues rallied around her, leaving supportive comments and sharing their own stories about family members who'd become money-obsessed and vindictive. I tried to ignore the social media campaign, but it was impossible to escape. Entirely. Friends from high school would send me screenshots, asking if everything was okay, if the posts were about me. Coworkers in Denver began treating me differently, more carefully, as if I might suddenly turn litigious over minor workplace disputes. The worst part was seeing how the narrative was affecting Mom. She'd grown quiet and withdrawn, caught between her daughters in a way that felt familiar but amplified. I'd always been the daughter who caused less drama, who required less attention, who could be counted on to accommodate everyone else's needs. Now I was the one creating conflict, forcing uncomfortable conversations, making everyone's life more complicated. "I just want my family back," Mom told me during one of our increasingly rare phone calls. "I want my daughters to love each other the way I love both of you." "I do love Monica," I said, and realized I meant it despite everything. But love doesn't mean accepting being treated as less than. It doesn't mean pretending that theft is generosity. "Theft?" Mom's voice sharpened. "That's a strong word, Jessica. What would you call taking money that legally belongs to someone else?" I asked. "What would you call violating a partnership agreement to avoid sharing proceeds? With your business partner?" "I'd call it a family disagreement that's gotten out of hand," Mom replied, but I could hear the doubt in her voice, the first crack in her unwavering support for Monica's version of events. The mediation session was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in downtown Phoenix, in a conference room that smelled like industrial carpet and fresh coffee. Monica arrived with her attorney and David, presenting a united front of professional competence and wounded dignity. I came with my legal team and a folder full of documents that told a different story than the one Monica had been sharing. The mediator was a gray-haired woman named Patricia Hendricks, who specialized in family business disputes. She'd seen this kind of case before, she told us. Siblings fighting over inheritances while their relationships crumbled under the weight of old resentments and new accusations. "Before we begin," she said, looking between Monica and me with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd refereed countless family wars, "I want both parties to understand that mediation is about finding solutions, not assigning blame. The goal is to reach an agreement that both sides can live with." Monica nodded graciously, the picture of reasonableness and cooperation. She'd dressed carefully for the session, professional but not aggressive, conveying competence without arrogance. When she spoke, her voice carried the measured tones of someone who'd spent years negotiating real estate deals and managing difficult clients. "I want to resolve this situation," she said, looking directly at the mediator rather than at me. "My sister and I have had some misunderstandings about our father's intentions, but I believe we can work through them without destroying our family relationships." It was a masterful opening, positioning herself as the peacemaker while subtly suggesting that I was the one threatening family harmony. She continued by outlining her version of events, the struggling business she'd saved, the difficult decisions she'd made while I was building my career in Denver, the generous settlement. She was prepared to offer to put this dispute behind us. When it was my turn to speak, I felt the weight of years of being dismissed, of having my perspective minimized and my concerns redirected. But I also felt something else, a clarity that came from finally understanding the full scope of what had happened. "This isn't a misunderstanding," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected. "This is about my sister violating a legal partnership agreement and spending money that didn't belong entirely to her. The documents make Dad's intentions clear, and Monica chose to ignore them." I laid out the timeline methodically. The partnership agreement Monica had hidden. The structured sale designed to avoid my involvement. The 3 years of benefits she'd enjoyed while I'd assumed responsibility for the lake house maintenance. I presented the emails showing her deliberate exclusion of me from the decision-making process. Monica's attorney tried to interrupt several times, arguing that the partnership agreement was outdated and that Monica had acted in good faith to preserve what she could of the family business. But the documents spoke for themselves, creating a paper trail that was difficult to explain away. "The question," I concluded, "isn't whether Monica acted with good intentions. The question is whether those intentions justify violating our father's explicit instructions about how his business should be handled. The mediator asked several clarifying questions, reviewing the partnership documents and the sale records with the methodical attention of someone who'd learned to find truth in competing narratives. Monica grew increasingly uncomfortable as the session progressed, her composed facade cracking under the weight of evidence she couldn't dismiss. During the lunch break, Monica's attorney approached my legal team with a settlement offer that was substantially higher than anything they'd proposed before. It was a significant amount of money, enough to change my life in meaningful ways, but it came with the same conditions as previous offers, a non-disclosure agreement that would prevent me from discussing the partnership violation publicly. "It's a good offer," my attorney told me as we reviewed the terms in a nearby coffee shop. "Probably more than we'd recover if we went to trial, and certainly faster than waiting for a court decision." I thought about the money, about what it could mean for my future, about the possibility of finally having the financial security that Monica had enjoyed for years. But I also thought about Dad's hard hat, about the careful planning he'd done to protect his daughter's interests, about the importance of honoring intentions even when it was inconvenient. "What happens if I don't take it?" I asked. "We go back to mediation this afternoon, and if we can't reach an agreement, we proceed to trial," my attorney replied. "That could take months, and the outcome would be uncertain. Juries are unpredictable, especially in family disputes." I looked out the coffee shop window at the Phoenix skyline, the glass towers and construction cranes that represented the kind of success Monica had achieved with money that should have been partially mine. Somewhere in that maze of development and ambition was my sister, probably calculating her next move, figuring out how to minimize the damage to her reputation and her business. "I need to think about it," I said finally. But even as I said the words, I knew what my answer would be. Some things were worth more than money, and sometimes the only way to honor someone's memory was to fight for their intentions, regardless of the personal cost. The afternoon session resumed with Monica's attorney presenting their settlement offer formally, emphasizing the generosity of the terms and the benefit of avoiding a lengthy court battle. They painted a picture of family reconciliation and mutual respect, suggesting that accepting the settlement would allow both sisters to move forward with their lives. "My client is prepared to be extremely generous," Monica's attorney said, "in the interest of preserving family relationships and honoring their father's memory." Patricia Hendricks looked at me expectantly, waiting for my response to an offer that most people would have considered more than fair. Monica watched me, with an expression I couldn't quite read, hope and calculation and something that might have been genuine regret. "I appreciate the offer," I said finally, "but I can't accept it." The silence that followed felt heavy with missed opportunities and burned bridges. Monica's face cycled through disbelief, anger, and resignation before settling into the mask of professional disappointment she wore when deals fell through. "Then we'll see you in court," her attorney said, already gathering his papers and preparing to leave. But Patricia Hendricks held up a hand, stopping the exodus. "Before we end this session, I'd like each party to consider one more question. What would your father want you to do?" It was a simple question, but it hung in the air like a challenge neither of us could ignore. Monica looked uncomfortable, shifting in her chair as she searched for an answer that would justify her actions without admitting wrongdoing. "Dad would want his family to stay together," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "Dad would want his intentions to be honored," I replied, looking directly at Monica for the first time since the mediation began. He would want the partnership agreement he created to mean something. Patricia Hendricks nodded slowly, making notes on her legal pad. "Then I suggest you both think carefully about how to honor those intentions while we prepare for the next phase of this process." The mediation ended without resolution, leaving both sides to prepare for a court battle that would make our family dispute a matter of public record. As I walked out of the building into the Phoenix heat, I felt the weight of the choice I'd Made the decision to value principle over peace, truth over family harmony. Monica was waiting by her car in the parking garage, David standing beside her with the protective stance of a husband who'd watched his wife's perfect world begin to crumble. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the realization that her carefully constructed narrative was no longer enough to control the situation. "This isn't over," she said as I approached my rental car, but her voice lacked the confidence it had carried for years. "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it's not going to end the way you thought it would." I drove back to Denver that evening, through mountain passes and desert highways that felt different now, charged with possibility and loss in equal measure. The lawsuit would proceed, the truth would come out, and our family would never be the same. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally telling my own story, finally claiming the inheritance that had always been mine, but had been buried under years of assumption and convenient forgetting. Dad's hard hat still sat on my kitchen counter when I got home, a silent reminder of the man who'd built something lasting and the daughter who'd finally found the courage to protect what he'd created. The legal battle ahead would be difficult, expensive, and emotionally draining. But it would also be true to the intentions of a man who'd spent his life building things that mattered, things that were meant to last beyond his own lifetime. Sometimes, the most important construction projects aren't made of wood and steel. Sometimes they're made of truth and courage and the willingness to honor someone's memory even when it costs everything. The Phoenix Business Journal headline appeared 3 weeks after the mediation failed, buried on page 4 between advertisements for commercial real estate and executive coaching services. Local developer faces family lawsuit over construction business sale. The article was brief, professionally written, but it contained enough details to make Monica's carefully maintained reputation begin to crack. I found out about the article from Angela, who'd called me at work with barely contained excitement in her voice. "Someone leaked the story," she said. "The reporter has copies of the partnership agreement and the sale documents. Monica's name is all over this." I sat in my Denver office reading the article on my computer screen while my coworkers moved through their morning routines around me. The reporter had done their homework, outlining the basic facts of the case without taking sides. But the implications were clear enough. Monica Thompson Martinez, rising star in Phoenix real estate, had sold a family business without following the legal requirements for partnership dissolution. The article quoted an unnamed source close to the family, describing years of tension over the handling of Robert Thompson's estate. It mentioned the lake house dispute and the mediation attempt, painting a picture of a family torn apart by business decisions and hidden agreements. Most damaging of all, it referenced the emails showing Monica's deliberate exclusion of me from the sale process. "This changes everything," my attorney told me during our phone call that afternoon. "Public pressure has a way of making people more reasonable in settlement negotiations." But I knew Monica well enough to predict her response. She wouldn't retreat quietly or admit wrongdoing publicly. Instead, she'd double down, find a way to spin the narrative in her favor, turn herself into the victim of an ungrateful sister's vindictive campaign. I was right. By evening, Monica had posted a lengthy statement on her professional Facebook page, carefully crafted to generate sympathy without directly addressing the legal accusations. She wrote about the difficulty of losing a beloved father, the weight of responsibility that had fallen on her shoulders, the painful reality of family, members who prioritized money over relationships. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who hurt us most deeply," the post concluded. "I continue to hope for healing and reconciliation, but I cannot allow false accusations to destroy the reputation I've worked so hard to build." The post generated dozens of supportive comments within hours, friends and colleagues rallying around Monica with messages of encouragement and shared stories about ungrateful family members. She'd managed to transform a news story about potential fraud into a narrative about sisterly betrayal and misplaced priorities. But not everyone was convinced. Angela had been monitoring social media and local business forums, tracking the conversation around the article and Monica's response. "There are cracks," she reported during our evening call. "Some people are asking questions about the partnership agreement, wondering why she never mentioned having a business partner." More importantly, the article had caught the attention of other contractors and business owners who'd worked with Dad over the years. They began reaching out through various channels, sharing their own memories of Robert Thompson and their surprise at learning about the family dispute. Tom Rodriguez, who'd subcontracted plumbing work for Thompson & Sons for over a decade, called me directly after finding my number through mutual contacts. "Your dad was the most ethical man I ever worked with," he told me, his voice heavy with emotion. "He always said his business was built on trust, and that his daughters would carry on that tradition. I can't believe Monica would do something like this." Others shared similar sentiments, creating a quiet groundswell of support from the construction community that had known and respected Dad. These weren't people who cared about social media posts or public relations campaigns. They were men and women who'd worked with their hands, who understood the value of keeping your word and honoring your agreements. Monica's attorney responded to the growing pressure by sending cease and desist letters to several of Dad's former colleagues, demanding they stop making public statements about the case. The letters backfired spectacularly, generating more attention than the original comments and creating the impression that Monica was trying to silence people who'd known the truth about her father's character. "She's making tactical errors," my attorney observed during one of our strategy sessions. "Desperation makes people do stupid things, and she's starting to look desperate." The court date was set for early December, giving both sides several months to prepare their cases. Monica's legal team had filed multiple motions challenging the validity of the partnership agreement, arguing that it was outdated and superseded by subsequent business decisions. They painted Dad as a man whose good intentions had been compromised by unclear documentation and family misunderstandings. My attorneys countered with a mountain of evidence showing the partnership agreement's continued validity and Monica's deliberate violation of its terms. They'd also uncovered additional financial documents showing how Monica had used the business sale proceeds, tracing the money through various investments and purchases, including the down payment on her Scottsdale house. But the most compelling evidence came from an unexpected source. While cleaning out Dad's workshop at the lake house, I'd found a small safe hidden behind a false panel in his workbench. Inside were additional business documents, including a letter addressed to me and dated just 2 months before his death. The letter was written in Dad's careful handwriting, the same precise penmanship he'd used to label parts bins and write work orders. In it, he explained his concerns about Monica's growing focus on real estate development and her suggestions that the construction business was becoming obsolete. He worried that she didn't understand the value of the relationships he'd built or the importance of maintaining the family's reputation for integrity. "Jessica," the letter read, "if something happens to me, I need you to protect what we've built. The partnership agreement isn't just about business. It's about making sure both my daughters understand the value of working together. Monica is smart and ambitious, but she sometimes forgets that success without integrity is just another form of failure." The letter went on to explain the lake house provision in detail, describing it as a safety net designed to ensure that family property remained connected to family values. He'd anticipated the possibility that Monica might try to modernize or streamline the business in ways that violated its founding principles. "The lake house represents everything I wanted to build," he wrote. "A place where family comes together, where success is measured by relationships rather than bank accounts. If the business ever loses that connection, I want you to take the lake house and remember what really matters." Reading Dad's words in his own handwriting, I felt a mixture of validation and sadness. He'd known this moment might come, had planned for the possibility that his daughters would need external structure to maintain their relationship. The partnership agreement wasn't just a legal document. It was his final attempt to teach us about cooperation and mutual respect. Monica's response to the letter's discovery was swift and predictable. Her attorneys argued that it was irrelevant to the legal case, a sentimental document with no bearing on business law. They suggested that Dad's concerns about Monica's business acumen were evidence of cognitive decline, proof that he wasn't thinking clearly in his final months. The accusation stung because it attacked Dad's memory directly, turning his careful planning into evidence of mental deterioration. But it also backfired by reinforcing the timeline of Monica's deception. If Dad had been mentally compromised, then Monica's failure to involve me in business decisions was even more problematic, suggesting she'd taken advantage of a vulnerable parent. As the court date approached, the personal toll of the lawsuit became increasingly difficult to bear. Mom had stopped calling entirely, unable to navigate conversations that didn't acknowledge the growing rift between her daughters. Uncle Frank and Aunt Susan had chosen Monica's side explicitly, sharing social media posts that supported her version of events while pointedly avoiding any mention of me. The isolation was particularly painful during holidays and family milestones. Monica's daughter Emma had her 8th birthday party in October, a celebration I learned about through mutual friends' social media posts rather than a personal invitation. The photos showed an elaborate princess-themed party at Monica's house, complete with professional entertainment and a cake that looked like it belonged in a magazine. I stared at the photos on my phone, seeing my niece growing up without me, missing moments that could never be recovered. Emma had been 3 when Dad died, too young to remember him clearly, but old enough to sense the tension that had grown between the adults in her family. Now she was learning to navigate family gatherings where one aunt was present and the other was spoken of only in hushed, disappointed tones. The hardest part was knowing that I was choosing this isolation, that I could end it at any time by accepting Monica's settlement offer and returning to my role as the accommodating younger sister. The money was still on the table, along with the promise of family reconciliation and restored relationships. All I had to do was sign a non-disclosure agreement and pretend that everything was fine. But every time I considered backing down, I'd return to the lake house and feel Dad's presence in the rooms he'd built with his own hands. The place was slowly being restored to its original condition, a project I'd taken on to honor his memory and maintain the property he'd loved so much. Working with wood and stone, fixing the problems that time and neglect had created, I felt connected to something larger than the lawsuit or the family drama. The work was also practical preparation for what might come after the court case. If I won, the lake house would officially become mine, but it would also become my responsibility in ways that went beyond legal ownership. I'd need to decide what to do with the property, how to honor Dad's intentions while creating something sustainable for the future. I'd been exploring the possibility of turning the lake house into a retreat center for families dealing with business succession issues, a place where people could work through the kind of conflicts that had torn my own family apart. The irony wasn't lost on me that I might build a business helping other families avoid the mistakes my own family had made. But first, I had to win the legal battle, and that meant preparing for a court case that would expose our family's dysfunction to public scrutiny. My attorneys had warned me about the emotional toll of testifying under oath, of having intimate family details dissected by opposing counsel, of seeing years of resentment and disappointment laid out in legal briefs. Monica would be equally exposed, forced to explain her actions under cross-examination, required to defend decisions she'd made in private without considering how they'd sound in open court. Her reputation as a successful businesswoman would be tested against evidence of ethical lapses and family betrayal. The week before the trial, I received an unexpected visitor at my Denver apartment. David stood in my hallway looking uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot as he searched for words to explain his presence. "Monica doesn't know I'm here," he said finally. "But I needed to talk to you before this thing goes to court." I invited him in, curious about what had driven Monica's husband to make the 4-hour drive from Phoenix without her knowledge. David had always been peripheral to our family drama, present at gatherings but rarely involved in the emotional, undercurrents that shaped our relationships. "This is killing her," he said once we'd settled in my living room. The stress, the public attention, the way people are looking at her differently. She's not sleeping, barely eating. The kids are asking questions she doesn't know how to answer. I felt a pang of sympathy for Monica, remembering the sister who'd once protected me from schoolyard bullies and helped me with homework. But I also remembered the years of subtle dismissal, the systematic exclusion from family decisions, the casual cruelty of her housewarming toast. "She could have avoided all of this," I said quietly. "She could have honored the partnership agreement from the beginning, or at least been honest about why she chose not to." David nodded, acknowledging the truth of what I'd said. "She knows that now. But she's too proud to admit it publicly, too invested in the story she's been telling herself about protecting the family." "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "Consider one more settlement," David said. "Not the legal boilerplate her attorneys have been sending, but a real conversation between sisters about how to move forward." I thought about his request, about the possibility of avoiding a public trial that would hurt everyone involved. But I also thought about Dad's letter, about his concerns that Monica had forgotten the value of integrity, about his hope that I would protect what they'd built together. "I'll meet with her," I said finally. But not to negotiate another settlement. To have the conversation we should have had 3 years ago, the one where she explains why she thought it was okay to violate Dad's partnership agreement. David looked relieved, as if any communication was better than the silence that had defined our relationship for months. "I'll arrange it," he said. "Somewhere neutral, just the two of you." The meeting was set for the following Saturday at a coffee shop in Flagstaff, halfway between our two cities and close enough to the lake house to carry the weight of shared memory. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where we could have privacy for what would likely be a difficult conversation. Monica walked in exactly on time, looking smaller and more tired than I'd seen her in years. The confident real estate agent, who'd dominated social situations with her charm and energy, had been replaced by someone who moved carefully, as if she wasn't sure of her welcome anywhere. "Thank you for coming," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "David said you wanted to talk," I replied, studying my sister's face for signs of the arrogance or manipulation that had characterized our recent interactions. Instead, I saw something I hadn't expected: genuine uncertainty. "I've been thinking about Dad's letter," Monica said without preamble. "About what he said about success without integrity being just another form of failure." I waited, letting her find her own way through whatever she'd come to say. "I convinced myself that I was protecting the family," she continued, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. "That taking charge of the business sale was necessary because you were too far away, too busy with your own life to get involved in the mess Dad left behind." "He didn't leave behind a mess," I said. "He left behind a successful business and clear instructions about how it should be handled." Monica nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth she'd been avoiding. "I know. That now. But at the time, it felt like I was drowning in responsibilities and decisions, and it seemed easier to handle everything myself than to try to coordinate with you across state lines." "Easier for you," I pointed out, "but not legal, and not what Dad intended." "No," Monica agreed, "not what Dad intended." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of years of misunderstanding and hurt feelings settling between us like a physical presence. I could see tears forming in Monica's eyes, the first genuine emotion she'd shown since the lawsuit began. "I don't know how to fix this," she said finally. "I don't know how to undo the damage I've caused, or how to restore the trust I've broken." "You could start by admitting publicly that you violated the partnership agreement," I suggested. "You could acknowledge that Dad's intentions should have been honored, regardless of whether it was convenient." Monica flinched as if I'd struck her. You know I can't do that. It would destroy my business, my reputation. Everything I've built would crumble. Everything you built with money that was partially mine, I reminded her. Everything you built by violating our father's explicit instructions. I know, Monica whispered, and for the first time since Dad's funeral, I saw my sister as vulnerable rather than calculating. I know what I did was wrong, but I don't know how to make it right without destroying my family's future. I thought about her children, about Tyler and Emma growing up in the shadow of their mother's legal troubles, about the business associates and friends who would view any admission of wrongdoing as evidence of fundamental character flaws. Maybe, I said carefully, the question isn't how to avoid consequences, but how to handle them with integrity. Dad would have respected someone who admitted their mistakes and tried to make amends, even if it cost them financially. Monica looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, hope and fear and something that might have been recognition. What are you saying? I'm saying that the trial is going to happen next week, and one of us is going to win and one of us is going to lose, I replied. But we could both choose to handle it in a way that honors Dad's memory instead of destroying what's left of our relationship. How? I thought about the letter hidden in Dad's workshop, about his hope that his daughters would learn to work together, about the lake house that represented everything he'd wanted to build. By telling the truth, I said, by admitting what really happened and why, and by finding a way to move forward that doesn't require one of us to be completely destroyed. Monica stared into her coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions she'd been afraid to ask. The truth is that I was scared, she said quietly. Scared that the business would fail if I had to coordinate with you. Scared that Dad's legacy would disappear if I didn't act quickly. Scared that I wasn't smart enough or strong enough to handle everything alone. So you decided to handle everything alone anyway, I observed. So I decided to handle everything alone anyway, she agreed. And there was something almost like relief in her voice, as if acknowledging her fear had somehow diminished its power over her. We talked for another hour, not negotiating or strategizing, but simply being sisters for the first time in years. Monica told me about the pressure she'd felt to succeed, about the way Dad's death had left her feeling responsible for everyone's well-being. I shared my own struggles with feeling excluded and dismissed, with watching our family's legacy be transformed into something I didn't recognize. When we finally stood to leave, I felt something had shifted between us. Not reconciliation exactly, but a recognition of shared loss and mutual understanding. The trial would still happen, the legal questions would still need to be resolved, but at least we'd finally had the honest conversation that should have taken place years earlier. Whatever happens next week, Monica said as we walked toward our cars, I want you to know that I'm sorry. Sorry for violating the partnership agreement. Sorry for excluding you from decisions. Sorry for treating you like you didn't matter. I know, I said, and realized I meant it. And I'm sorry it took a lawsuit to get us to this conversation. Monica nodded, tears streaming down her face as she climbed into her car. I watched her drive away toward Phoenix and her complicated life, toward the business she'd built with questionable methods and the family she was trying to protect from the consequences of her choices. The trial would begin in 5 days, and regardless of its outcome, both of our lives would be permanently changed. But for the first time in months, I felt something other than anger or determination. I felt the possibility of forgiveness, not as weakness or capitulation, but as another way of honoring Dad's memory and the values he'd tried to teach us both. The lake house sat quiet in the distance, waiting to see which daughter would ultimately claim its legacy. But perhaps more importantly, waiting to see if either of us had learned what our father had really wanted to teach us about family, integrity, and the true meaning of success. The Maricopa County Superior Court felt smaller than I'd expected, its wood-paneled walls and fluorescent lighting creating an atmosphere more like a business meeting than the dramatic confrontation I'd imagined. Judge Margaret Chen presided. From her elevated bench, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her expression neutral as she reviewed the thick stack of documents our attorneys had submitted over the past months, Monica sat at the plaintiff's table with her legal team, wearing a navy blue suit that projected competence and respectability. She looked composed, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed silently against the table. David sat in the gallery behind her, along with Mom and Uncle Frank, creating a wall of family support that made my side of the courtroom feel particularly empty. I had Angela beside me at the defendant's table, along with my attorney, Sarah Martinez and her associate. Behind us sat Tom Rodriguez and 3 other contractors who'd worked with Dad, men who'd taken time off from their jobs to witness what they saw as a test of Robert Thompson's legacy. The morning began with opening statements that laid out familiar territory. Monica's attorney painted her as a daughter who'd stepped up during a family crisis, making difficult decisions while grieving the loss of her father. He described the construction business as struggling and outdated, saved only by Monica's quick thinking and business acumen. My client didn't violate any partnership agreement, he argued, pacing in front of the jury box. She fulfilled her father's true intentions by preserving what could be saved and transforming it into something successful. The plaintiff's claims are based on technicalities and outdated documents that don't reflect the reality of modern business practices. Sarah Martinez countered with a methodical presentation of facts, walking the jury through the partnership agreement clause by clause, explaining how Monica's actions had systematically violated each provision. She displayed timeline charts showing the business sale process, highlighting the deliberate exclusion of me from crucial decisions. This case isn't about business judgment, Sarah told the jury, her voice calm but forceful. It's about legal obligations and contractual promises. The defendant had a legal duty to involve her sister in major business decisions, and she chose to ignore that duty for her own benefit. The first day of testimony focused on the technical aspects of the partnership agreement, with expert witnesses explaining business law and contract interpretation. It was dry material, but necessary foundation for the more dramatic revelations that would follow. Monica's accountant testified about the business sale structure, describing it as a standard transaction designed to maximize value and minimize tax liability. Under cross-examination, however, Sarah exposed the careful planning that had gone into avoiding the partnership provisions, showing emails where Monica had specifically asked about streamlining ownership structure to facilitate the sale. "Isn't it true," Sarah asked, "that Mrs. Martinez instructed you to structure the sale in a way that would avoid triggering partnership obligations?" The accountant shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Mrs. Martinez wanted to ensure the transaction could proceed smoothly without unnecessary complications. And by unnecessary complications, you mean involving her sister in the decision-making process? I mean ensuring all parties could focus on maximizing value for the estate. It was skillful evasion, but the jury had heard enough to understand the subtext. Monica had deliberately structured the sale to exclude me, regardless of legal requirements. The second day brought more personal testimony, starting with Tom Rodriguez describing his decades of work with Dad and his shock at learning about the family dispute. His weathered hands gestured as he spoke about Robert Thompson's integrity and his frequent mentions of wanting to provide for both daughters equally. "Bob was always talking about his girls," Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. "How proud he was of both of them, how he wanted to make sure they'd be taken care of. The idea that one daughter would cut the other out of business decisions would have broken his heart." Monica's attorney tried to undermine Tom's testimony by suggesting he was biased in my favor, but the damage was done. Here was a man who'd known Dad professionally for years, testifying that Monica's actions contradicted everything he'd understood about Robert Thompson's values. The afternoon brought Monica to the stand, and I watched my sister swear to tell the truth with a mixture of anticipation and dread. She looked confident initially, answering her attorney's questions with the polished delivery of someone accustomed to high-stakes negotiations. She described the chaos following Dad's death, the overwhelming responsibility of managing business affairs while grieving, the pressure to make quick decisions to preserve what value remained. She painted herself as the dutiful daughter who'd sacrificed her own interests to protect the family legacy. "I never intended to exclude Jessica," Monica testified, looking directly at the jury. "But she was building her own career in Denver, and I felt responsible for handling the immediate crisis here in Arizona. Every decision I made was designed to benefit our entire family." But Sarah's cross-examination revealed the carefully constructed nature of Monica's narrative. Armed with emails and financial documents, Sarah walked Monica through the timeline of the business sale, forcing her to acknowledge each deliberate choice to exclude me from the process. "Mrs. Martinez, this email from March 15th shows you discussing the partnership agreement with your attorney, correct?" Monica glanced at the document on the screen. "Yes." "And in this email, you specifically ask about ways to minimize partner involvement in the sale process, don't you?" "I was concerned about logistical complications." "By logistical complications, you mean having to consult with your sister before making major decisions about your father's business?" Monica's composed facade began to crack. "I was trying to protect Jessica from having to deal with difficult business decisions during a time of grief." "For 3 years?" Sarah asked. "You've been protecting your sister from difficult decisions for 3 years while you built a real estate empire. With the proceeds from the business sale?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and I saw Monica realize that her carefully prepared answers weren't sufficient for the reality of cross-examination. She tried to explain her reasoning, but each answer seemed to dig the hole deeper, revealing the calculated nature of her exclusion of me. The most damaging moment came when Sarah presented Dad's letter, the one I'd found hidden in his workshop. Monica's face went pale as Sarah read Dad's words aloud, his concerns about her growing focus on real estate development, his worry that she was forgetting the value of integrity and family cooperation. "Were you aware that your father had these concerns about your business judgment?" Sarah asked. "My father supported my career choices," Monica replied, but her voice lacked conviction. "Even when those choices involved violating the partnership agreement he'd carefully crafted to protect both daughters' interests?" Monica couldn't answer. She sat silent at the witness stand, tears beginning to form in her eyes as the weight of Dad's written disappointment settled over the courtroom. The jury watched her struggle with the realization that her father had anticipated exactly the kind of ethical compromises she'd ended up making. The third day brought my testimony, and I felt the strange vulnerability of having my family's dysfunction examined under oath. Sarah guided me through the years of subtle exclusion, the missed family meetings, the growing sense that I was being written out of family decisions. But the most powerful moment came when I described finding Dad's letter and understanding that he'd known this conflict might arise. I explained how his words had given me the courage to fight for what he'd intended, even when it meant challenging the sister I'd always tried to accommodate. "This isn't about money," I said, looking directly at the jury. "This is about honoring my father's intentions and making sure his carefully planned legacy isn't sacrificed to someone else's ambition." Monica's attorney tried to paint me as vindictive and money-obsessed during cross-examination, but the letter had undermined that narrative. Dad's own words made it clear that the partnership agreement wasn't about distrust or technicalities, but about ensuring his daughters would work together rather than allowing one to dominate the other. The final day of trial brought closing arguments that summarized weeks of evidence and years of family pain. Monica's attorney made a last desperate attempt to frame her as the victim of an ungrateful sister's legal maneuvering, but the documentary evidence was too strong to overcome. Sarah's closing argument was masterful, weaving together the contract violations, the financial evidence, and Dad's letter into a compelling narrative of systematic betrayal. She reminded the jury that contracts exist precisely to prevent the kind of self-serving reinterpretation Monica had used to justify her actions. "Robert Thompson was a careful man who planned for his daughter's future," Sarah concluded. He created a partnership structure designed to protect both children equally, and he trusted them to honor his intentions. The defendant chose to violate that trust for her own benefit, and now she must face the consequences of that choice. Judge Chen sent the jury out to deliberate at 3 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. Monica and I sat in our respective corners of the courthouse, surrounded by our supporters, waiting for strangers to decide our family's fate. The waiting felt interminable, filled with nervous energy and second-guessing that couldn't change anything now. Angela brought coffee and tried to distract me with small talk, but my attention kept drifting to Monica across the lobby. She sat with David and Mom, their heads close together in intense conversation. I wondered what they were saying, whether Monica was finally acknowledging the full scope of what she'd done or still trying to find ways to justify her actions. The jury returned after 6 hours of deliberation, their faces revealing nothing as they filed back into the courtroom. Judge Chen asked the foreman to read the verdict, and the words seemed to echo in the suddenly silent room. In the matter of Thompson versus Martinez, we find in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The verdict was comprehensive and devastating for Monica. The jury found that she had violated the partnership agreement, that the business sale should have required my consent, and that I was entitled to 50% of the sale proceeds plus interest and legal fees. They also upheld my claim to full ownership of the lake house under the partnership's fallback provisions. More damaging than the financial judgment was the jury's finding that Monica had acted with deliberate intent to exclude me from partnership decisions. This wasn't an oversight or misunderstanding, but calculated deception designed to maximize her personal benefit at my expense. Monica sat frozen as the verdict was read, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. David reached for her hand, but she seemed unreachable, lost in the realization that her calculated gamble had failed spectacularly. Mom looked between her two daughters with an expression of profound sadness, perhaps finally understanding that the family unity she'd tried to preserve was already broken long before the lawsuit began. Uncle Frank and Aunt Susan left the courtroom without speaking to anyone, their support for Monica having evaporated in the face of overwhelming evidence. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with cameras and microphones, eager to capture the aftermath of a case that had generated local interest as a cautionary tale about family business succession. Sarah made a brief statement acknowledging the verdict and expressing hope that it would encourage other families to honor their legal obligations to each other. Monica's attorney announced their intention to appeal, but his heart didn't seem to be in it. Appeals are expensive and difficult, especially when the trial record is as comprehensive as ours had become. The evidence of Monica's deliberate deception was simply too strong to overcome on procedural grounds. I drove back to Denver that evening through mountain passes that looked different in the aftermath of victory. The legal battle was over, but its consequences would ripple through our family for years to come. I'd won everything I'd asked for, but the cost in relationships and emotional energy had been enormous. The financial settlement would change my life significantly. Half of the business sale proceeds, plus 3 years of interest, amounted to over $1 million. Combined with full ownership of the lake house, I now had resources I'd never imagined possessing, opportunities to build something meaningful from Dad's legacy. But the money felt secondary to the vindication of Dad's intentions. The jury had seen through Monica's justifications and recognized the systematic nature of her betrayal. They'd understood that this wasn't about sibling rivalry or personality conflicts, but about fundamental questions of integrity and legal obligation. Monica's appeal was filed 6 weeks later, but it was dismissed within 3 months. Her attorneys couldn't identify any significant legal errors in the trial proceedings, and the documentary evidence made any claim of jury misconduct impossible to sustain. The verdict was final, and Monica was required to begin making payments immediately. The financial impact on Monica was severe but not catastrophic. She was forced to take out a significant loan against her house and liquidate some investments. But her real estate business remained profitable enough to support the payment plan the court had approved. More damaging was the reputational cost. The whispered conversations at industry events about the successful agent who'd betrayed her own sister. I used part of the settlement money to establish the Robert Thompson Family Business Center at the Lake House, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping families navigate succession planning and partnership disputes. The irony of building a family reconciliation center from the wreckage of my own family conflict wasn't lost on me, but it felt like the most meaningful way to honor Dad's memory. The center's first workshop was held in September, exactly 2 years after Monica's housewarming party. 15 families attended, each dealing with their own version of succession planning challenges and sibling conflicts. I found purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes that had torn my family apart, sharing hard-won wisdom about the importance of clear communication and legal documentation. Monica and I didn't speak for almost a year after the trial ended. The silence felt different from our previous estrangements, heavier with finality and mutual understanding of what had been lost. We'd moved beyond the possibility of pretending that everything was fine, but we hadn't yet found a way to build something new from the ruins of our relationship. The first contact came through Mom, who'd been quietly working to facilitate some form of reconciliation. She arranged a lunch meeting at a neutral restaurant in Phoenix, presenting it to both of us as a family obligation rather than a personal choice. Monica looked older when I saw her again, marked by the stress of the legal battle and its aftermath. She'd lost weight and seemed to carry herself more carefully, as if she'd learned not to trust her own judgment completely. But there was also something different in her eyes, a quality I eventually recognized as humility. "I've been going to therapy," she said without preamble, once we'd ordered our food and navigated the initial awkwardness of conversation. Trying to understand how I convinced myself that violating Dad's partnership agreement was protecting the family. I waited, letting her find her own way through what was clearly a prepared statement. "The therapist says I've always had trouble distinguishing between what I want and what's right," Monica continued. "That I learned to rationalize selfish decisions by framing them as sacrifices for other people." "That sounds about right," I said, not unkindly. Monica smiled ruefully. "She also says I need to make amends, not just apologize, but actually change the behavior that caused the problem in the first place." "What does that look like?" I asked. "I don't know yet," Monica admitted, "but I want to figure it out. I want to find a way to honor Dad's memory that doesn't involve pretending he would have approved of what I did." We talked for 2 hours, carefully navigating years of hurt feelings and broken trust. Monica told me about the pressure she'd felt to be the successful daughter, the way Dad's death had triggered a panic about family security that had clouded her judgment. I shared my own struggles with feeling invisible in family dynamics, with learning to assert my own needs instead of automatically accommodating everyone else. It wasn't reconciliation exactly, but it was a beginning. We agreed to try family therapy together, to see if professional guidance could help us build something sustainable from the honesty that had finally emerged between us. The Lake House Center continues to grow, hosting workshops and retreats for families dealing with business succession challenges. I live there full-time now, having left my Denver job to focus on the nonprofit work that feels like Dad's true legacy. The house itself has been carefully restored to reflect his original vision, a place where family comes together around shared values rather than competing interests. Monica visits occasionally, usually when she's bringing families to the center for consultation. We work together professionally with careful boundaries and mutual respect, focusing on helping others avoid the mistakes that cost us years of relationship. It's not the sisterhood we might have had, but it's honest and purposeful in ways our previous dynamic never was. Last month, Monica's daughter Emma asked if she could spend a weekend at the lake house, wanting to learn more about the grandfather. She barely remembered. I said yes, and spent 2 days showing her through Dad's workshop, teaching her to use some of his tools, sharing stories about the man who'd built something lasting from integrity and hard work. Emma is 12 now, old enough to understand that. Her mother and aunt have a complicated history, but young enough to hope that families can heal from even serious wounds. Watching her explore the house and grounds, seeing her connect to Dad's legacy in her own way, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope for our family's future. The settlement money has been invested carefully, generating income that supports the family center and my own modest needs. I drive Dad's old pickup truck now, retrieved from storage and restored to working condition. It feels appropriate, using his tools to continue work he would have understood and approved of. Sometimes, in the evening quiet of the lake house, I can almost hear Dad's voice carried on the wind through the trees he planted. "Build something that lasts," he used to say. "Something that matters." The family business is gone, sold and transformed into someone else's success story. But the values he tried to teach, the importance of integrity and keeping your word, those have found new expression in the work I do here. Monica's real estate business continues to thrive, though she's made changes in how she operates, hiring partners and creating oversight structures that prevent the kind of unilateral decision-making that caused our family crisis. She's also started volunteering with business ethics organizations, sharing her story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of prioritizing success over integrity. The housewarming party feels like something that happened in another lifetime, to different people who didn't yet understand the full cost of their choices. Monica's joke about some of us actually making it revealed more truth than she'd intended. Success without integrity really is just another form of failure, and making it at the expense of family relationships leaves victory feeling hollow and incomplete. But we've both learned something valuable from the wreckage of our original relationship. Real success isn't measured by bank accounts or real estate portfolios or social media posts designed to generate envy. It's measured by whether you can sleep peacefully, knowing you've honored your obligations to the people who trusted you. Dad would be proud of the family center, I think. He'd appreciate the work being done to help other families avoid the conflicts that tore us apart. He might even be proud of Monica, watching her slowly rebuild her life around principles rather than profit margins, learning to measure success by integrity rather than accumulation. The lake house sits quiet in the Arizona mountains, hosting families who are learning to navigate succession planning and partnership disputes with honesty and mutual respect. It's become what Dad always intended it to be, a place where family comes together around shared values, where success is measured by relationships rather than bank accounts. Sometimes Monica and I sit on the deck in the evening, watching the light fade over the water, talking about the families we're trying to help and the mistakes we've learned to avoid. We're not the sisters we used to be, but we're becoming the women Dad hoped we could be. Honest, principled, and committed to building something that lasts beyond our own lifetimes. The property deed sits framed in my office now, not as a trophy of legal victory, but as a reminder of the responsibility that comes with inheriting someone's legacy. Dad built this place with his own hands, but he built it for his daughters to share. It took a lawsuit and years of estrangement for us to understand what he'd really been trying to teach us. But we finally got there. Some of us actually made it, Monica had said at her housewarming party. She was right, just not in the way she'd intended. We both made it eventually to the place Dad had hoped we'd find. A understanding that real success comes from honoring the trust people place in you, even when it's inconvenient, even when it costs you everything you thought you wanted. 5. Years after the courthouse steps and the camera flashes, I stood in the same kitchen where Monica had once dismissed my concerns with practiced deflection. But this time, she was the one holding documents, and I was the one listening to an unexpected proposal that would change everything again. "I want to buy back into the family business," Monica said, spreading architectural plans across the granite island that had once symbolized her success built on disputed foundations. Not Thompson & Sons construction, but something new. Something we build together this time. The plans showed a development project unlike anything Monica had pursued before. Instead of luxury subdivisions or commercial complexes, she'd designed a community of affordable homes specifically for families transitioning out of financial hardship. The project would be built using sustainable materials and traditional construction methods that honored Dad's original approach to building. "I've been working on this for 18 months, Monica continued, her voice carrying none of the calculated confidence I remembered from our courthouse confrontations. "The financing is secured, the permits are in progress, and I have commitments from 3 families who worked with Dad. But I can't do it alone, and I don't want to do it alone." I studied the plans while Monica waited, seeing traces of Dad's influence in the attention to craftsmanship details and the emphasis on community spaces that would bring neighbors together. This wasn't the cookie-cutter development that had made Monica wealthy, but something that required genuine vision and long-term commitment. "Why now?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "Because Emma asked me a question last month that I couldn't answer," Monica replied, settling into the chair across from me with the careful movements of someone who'd learned not to assume her welcome anywhere. "She wanted to know what Grandpa would think about the work I do, whether he'd be proud of the houses I build." The question hung between us, loaded with implications neither of us had been ready to address during our years of legal warfare and careful reconciliation. Emma was 17 now, preparing for college, old enough to understand the complexities of adult relationships, but young enough to hope that families could evolve beyond their mistakes. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "I told her I wasn't sure," Monica admitted, and I heard something in her voice that I'd rarely encountered during our childhood or adult relationship: genuine humility. But that I wanted to find out. Over the following weeks, Monica and I met regularly to discuss the proposed partnership, approaching each conversation with the wariness of former adversaries who'd learned to respect each other's capacity for both cooperation and conflict. The family therapy sessions we'd attended had given us tools for navigating difficult discussions, but this felt different, more consequential than anything we'd attempted since Dad's death. The proposed development would be built on land Monica had purchased near Flagstaff, close enough to the lake house that families could visit the center for financial counseling and business planning workshops. The connection wasn't accidental. Monica had designed the project to complement the work I'd been doing rather than compete with it. "I've been thinking about what Dad meant when he wrote that letter," Monica said during one of our planning sessions, referring to the document that had played such a crucial role in our legal battle. "About success without integrity being just another form of failure. I think he was warning me about exactly the kind of person I became." We were sitting on the deck of the lake house, watching the afternoon light move across water that had witnessed decades of family gatherings and seasonal changes. The setting felt appropriate for the conversation we'd been avoiding for years, the honest assessment of what we'd lost and what we might still be able to build together. "But he also wrote about hoping we'd learn to work together," I reminded her. Maybe this is what he had in mind. Monica pulled out a folder containing financial projections and construction timelines, but also something more personal: a business partnership agreement she'd drafted with the help of attorneys who specialized in family enterprises. The document was comprehensive and carefully structured, addressing the power sharing and decision-making issues that had destroyed our previous collaboration. "I want this to be different," Monica said, opening the folder with hands that trembled slightly. "I want us to be equal partners, with equal say in every major decision. No shortcuts, no streamlined decision-making, no protecting each other from difficult conversations." The partnership agreement reflected months of careful planning and legal consultation. Monica would contribute the land and initial financing, while I would oversee construction management and community outreach. Profits would be split equally, and both partners would have veto power over significant decisions. Most importantly, The agreement included provisions for regular family mediation sessions and external oversight to prevent the kind of miscommunication that had led to our previous conflict. "There's something else," Monica said, reaching into the folder to retrieve a second document. "I want to make restitution for the money I should have shared with you years ago, beyond what the court ordered." The document outlined Monica's proposal to transfer additional assets to me, including her share of some commercial properties and a portion of her real estate business equity. The total value exceeded what I'd recovered through the lawsuit, representing a voluntary acknowledgement of harm that went beyond legal requirements. "This isn't about clearing my conscience," Monica said, watching me review the financial details. "This is about acknowledging that I stole years of opportunity from you. Years when you could have been building wealth and making choices based on your actual financial position rather than what I allowed you to know about." I set down the documents and looked at my sister, seeing someone I'd never quite encountered before. A person willing to take full responsibility for her actions without seeking anything in return. The Monica I'd grown up with had always been calculating, always positioning herself for maximum advantage even in moments of apparent generosity. "What changed?" I asked. "Therapy," Monica said simply, and watching Emma grow up with questions about integrity that I couldn't answer honestly. "And working with families at your center, seeing what healthy partnerships actually look like." Over the previous 2 years, Monica had become a regular volunteer at the Robert Thompson Family Business Center, initially as part of her own healing process, but increasingly as someone who could offer valuable insights to families struggling with succession planning. Her experience as both the perpetrator and victim of family business conflicts gave her a unique perspective on the importance of clear communication and shared decision-making. "The families we work with taught me something I'd never understood," Monica continued. "Real partnership isn't about dividing everything equally. It's about trusting each other enough to be honest about your limitations and your fears." I thought about the workshops we'd hosted, the families who'd arrived at the lake house carrying years of resentment and miscommunication, and the gradual process of helping them build new frameworks for working together. Some succeeded, and some didn't, but the ones who found lasting solutions always had one thing in common: a willingness to prioritize relationship health over individual advantage. "I'm scared," Monica said, and the admission seemed to surprise her as much as it surprised me. "Scared that I'll fall back into old patterns, scared that success will make me forget what I've learned about the importance of partnership." "Then we build in safeguards," I replied, thinking about the oversight mechanisms that had worked for other families we'd counseled. External accountability, regular check-ins, clear consequences for violating partnership principles. We spent the next month refining the partnership agreement with input from the business mediators and family therapists who'd helped us navigate our reconciliation. The document that emerged was unlike anything I'd seen in traditional business partnerships, incorporating elements of family therapy and conflict resolution that acknowledge the emotional complexity of working with people you'd once hurt or been hurt by. The Thompson Sisters Community Development Project broke ground on a crisp October morning, with Emma and Tyler wielding ceremonial shovels alongside the construction crew Monica had assembled. The workers were a mix of people who'd known Dad and younger contractors who'd learned about his reputation for integrity and quality craftsmanship. Mom attended the groundbreaking ceremony, along with Tom Rodriguez and several other members of Dad's extended professional family. Watching them gather around the construction site, I felt something I hadn't experienced since childhood. The sense that our family was building something together rather than competing for limited resources. "Your father would be proud," Mom told Monica and me as we watched the first foundation stakes being driven into the ground. "Not just of the houses you're building, but of the way you're building them together." The construction process became a test of our new partnership agreements, presenting daily opportunities for conflict and collaboration. Monica's instinct was still to make quick decisions and move forward efficiently, while my tendency was to consult extensively and build consensus before acting. But the partnership structure we'd created forced us to find middle ground, to negotiate. solutions that honored both perspectives. The first house was completed 6 months later, a modest 3-bedroom structure that reflected Dad's attention to detail and commitment to using quality materials. The family who moved in had been living in transitional housing after job loss and medical bankruptcy, but they'd participated in financial counseling at the Lake House Center and were ready to rebuild their stability. "This feels different," Monica said as we walked through the completed house with the new owners, seeing their children choose bedrooms and plan where furniture would go. Different from selling houses to people who already have everything they need. The difference was evident in Monica's demeanor and energy level. Instead of the restless ambition that had driven her real estate career, she showed patience and investment in outcomes that extended beyond immediate profit margins. She spent hours with each family, helping them understand maintenance requirements and connecting them with community resources. By the end of the first year, Thompson Sisters Community Development had completed 12 houses and begun construction on 8 more. The project had attracted attention from housing advocacy organizations and local government officials, who were looking for models of sustainable, affordable housing development. More importantly, the partnership had survived its initial challenges and begun generating the kind of trust that made complex decisions manageable. Monica and I had learned to disagree productively, to challenge each other's ideas without questioning each other's motives, to build on our different strengths rather than competing for control. Emma decided to study social work and community development in college, inspired by watching her mother and aunt create something that served families rather than exploiting their needs. Tyler chose engineering, planning to join the family business after graduation with skills that could expand its technical capabilities. "They're going to be better at this than we ever were," Monica observed during one of our monthly partnership review meetings, watching Tyler help survey a new construction site while Emma interviewed potential homeowners about their housing priorities. "They're starting from a better foundation," I agreed, thinking about the partnership skills and conflict resolution tools that both children had absorbed by watching their family navigate difficult territory with honesty and mutual respect. The Lake House Center had evolved as well, incorporating lessons learned from the Thompson Sisters partnership into its family business curriculum. We now offered specialized workshops for siblings considering business partnerships, using our own experience as both cautionary tale and success story. The most powerful sessions were the ones where Monica and I appeared together, sharing the story of our conflict and reconciliation with families who were struggling with similar issues. These presentations required careful preparation and emotional vulnerability, but they consistently produced breakthrough moments for families who'd been stuck in destructive patterns. The hardest part wasn't the lawsuit or the media attention, Monica would tell these audiences, describing our journey from antagonists to partners. The hardest part was admitting that I'd been wrong about what success actually meant. During our 5th year of partnership, Thompson Sisters Community Development received recognition from the Arizona Housing Coalition for innovative approaches to affordable housing development. The award ceremony was held in Phoenix, in a hotel ballroom filled with developers, government officials, and housing advocates. Monica and I stood together at the podium, accepting an award that represented not just professional achievement, but personal transformation. Looking out at the audience, I saw Tom Rodriguez and several other contractors who'd known Dad, their faces reflecting pride in what his daughters had eventually learned to build together. "This award belongs to our father, Robert Thompson," Monica said into the microphone, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. "He taught us that real success comes from building things that serve your community, and that the most important construction project is building relationships based on trust and mutual respect." I added my own remarks about the importance of learning from mistakes and the possibility of redemption through honest partnership. But the most meaningful moment came afterward, when families from our housing development approached to share their own stories of stability and hope. "You gave us more than a house," one mother told us, holding her young daughter's hand while her husband stood nearby with their baby son. You gave us a chance to rebuild our family's future on solid ground. These conversations reminded me why the partnership with Monica had been worth the risk and effort. We weren't just building houses or running a business. We were participating in the kind of community building that Dad had always valued. The work of creating stability and opportunity for families who needed both. The lake house has become something beyond what any of us originally envisioned. It serves as headquarters for both the family business center and the community development company, but it's also become a place where our extended family gathers for holidays and celebrations that feel genuine rather than performative. Emma brings college friends home for weekends, showing them through Grandpa's workshop and explaining the family business that emerged from conflict and grew into collaboration. Tyler spends summer breaks working construction sites, learning skills that connect him to traditions that predate the family drama that once seemed so important. Monica and I meet there monthly for partnership reviews that have evolved into something closer to sisterly conversations, sharing challenges and successes with the kind of honesty that once seemed impossible between us. We've learned to disagree without personal attacks, to admit mistakes without devastating shame, to celebrate each other's contributions without competition or resentment. I wish Dad could see this, Monica said during our most recent meeting. Watching Emma teach a group of teenagers how to use woodworking tools in the workshop that still smells faintly of sawdust and machine oil. Maybe he can, I replied, not because I believe in supernatural intervention, but because the values he tried to teach us have found expression in ways that honor his memory and serve his community. The Thompson family story doesn't have a neat ending because families don't end, they evolve. Monica and I will probably always carry scars from our years of conflict, but we've learned to build around those wounds rather than pretending they don't exist. Our partnership works because it acknowledges our capacity for both cooperation and betrayal, creating structures that support our better instincts while guarding against our worst ones. The houses we build together stand as monuments to the possibility of redemption and the power of honest partnership. Each foundation we pour represents another family's opportunity for stability, but it also represents our own ongoing commitment to building something that lasts beyond our individual ambitions. Emma asked me recently whether I'd forgiven Monica for the years of exclusion and financial betrayal, and I realized the question itself reflected an outdated understanding of what forgiveness means. Forgiveness isn't a single moment of absolution, but an ongoing choice to build relationship around shared values rather than past wounds. Monica and I have chosen to build something together that serves our community and honors our father's memory. That choice requires daily recommitment to partnership principles that don't always come naturally to either of us, but it also generates rewards that neither of us could have achieved alone. The satisfaction of meaningful work, the joy of healthy family relationships, and the peace that comes from aligning our actions with our deepest values. The lake house sits quiet in the Arizona mountains, hosting families who are learning to navigate business partnerships and succession planning with honesty and mutual respect. The Thompson Sisters Community Development Project continues expanding, providing affordable housing for families who need both shelter and hope. And two sisters who once seemed destined for permanent estrangement have learned to build something beautiful from the ruins of their original relationship. Sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and the lake reflects starlight like scattered diamonds, I think about Dad's letter and his hope that his daughters would learn to work together. It took us longer than he probably expected, and the path was more difficult than he could have imagined, but we finally got there. We learned that real success isn't measured by individual achievement, but by the quality of what you build together, and that the most important construction projects are the ones that create lasting value for your community and your family. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.